In the small but proud settlement of Angels Camp, California, Rosalind Vance stood before her mirror, gazing at her reflection with a mixture of resignation and defiance. The year was 1874, and at 26 years old, she had grown accustomed to the whispers that followed her through the dusty streets. "Too big for any man to handle," they'd say, not bothering to lower their voices as she passed by. The gold rush that had once made Angels Camp prosperous had faded, but the cruel tongues of the townspeople remained as sharp as ever. Rosalind tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and straightened her dress, a beautiful creation she had sewn herself, with enough fabric to accommodate her ample figure. Despite what the townsfolk thought, she took pride in her appearance. Her mother had always told her that beauty came in all shapes and sizes before consumption had taken her 5 years earlier, leaving Rosalind to run their modest dressmaking shop alone. "Another day," she whispered to herself, pinching color into her cheeks. "Another day to hold your head high." The bell above her shop door chimed as she descended the stairs from her small apartment. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the colorful fabrics and half-finished garments that filled the cozy space. Rosalind's fingers were nimble and her eye for detail unmatched, which was why even the cruelest gossips in Angels Camp still brought their sewing to her. They might mock her behind her back, but they respected her skill. She had barely begun sorting through the day's orders when the door opened again. Martha Pearson, the banker's wife and one of the town's most notorious gossips, swept in with her usual air of superiority. "Good morning, Mrs. Pearson," Rosalind said pleasantly, determined not to let the woman's presence ruin her day. "Miss Vance," Martha replied, her gaze sweeping critically over Rosalind's form. "I need my blue gown altered for the spring social. It seems I've lost some weight since last season." She emphasized the word "lost" as if it were a personal accomplishment meant to wound. Rosalind merely smiled. "Of course. I can have it ready by next Tuesday. Would you like to leave it with me now?" Martha sniffed and handed over a package. "See that you don't ruin it. It's French silk, you know." "I'm well aware of the fabric, Mrs. Pearson. I selected it myself when you ordered the gown last year." A flash of irritation crossed Martha's face, but before she could reply, the shop door burst open again. A man Rosalind had never seen before stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the morning sun. Dust from the trail covered his clothes, and his face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but something about his presence commanded attention. "Pardon the interruption, ladies," he said, his voice deep and smooth as river stones. "I'm looking for the sheriff's office." Martha Pearson's demeanor changed instantly. She straightened her back and offered a coquettish smile that looked absurd on her middle-aged face. "Why, you must be new in town, sir. The sheriff's office is just down the street, past the saloon." He nodded his thanks, but his eyes had already moved to Rosalind. They were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, and when they met hers, Rosalind felt a peculiar flutter in her chest. "Much obliged," he said, tipping his hat before stepping back into the street. As soon as he was gone, Martha turned to Rosalind with gleaming eyes. "Now there's a real man. I wonder what business brings him to Angels Camp." She looked Rosalind up and down with a smirk. "Not that you need to concern yourself with such matters. Some men simply require a daintier touch." The insult stung, but Rosalind had grown a thick skin over the years. "Will that be all, Mrs. Pearson? I have several orders to complete today." After Martha left, Rosalind found her thoughts returning to the stranger. There was something in his gaze, not pity or mockery, which she was accustomed to seeing in men's eyes, but something else entirely. Interest, perhaps. She shook her head, dismissing the foolish notion. Men like him didn't look twice at women like her. That was simply the way of the world. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Spring was always Rosalind's busiest season, with the annual social gathering approaching, and everyone wanting new clothes or alterations to their existing wardrobes. She worked from dawn until late into the night, her fingers constantly moving, cutting, pinning, and stitching by the light of oil lamps when darkness fell. It was on one such evening, with rain pattering against the windows and most of Angel's camp already tucked in for the night, that the bell above her door chimed again. Rosalind looked up, startled. It was well past business hours. The stranger from earlier in the week stood in her shop, removing his hat as water dripped from his long coat onto her floor. "I apologize for the late hour," he said. "And the mess." He gestured to the small puddle forming beneath him. Rosalind set aside her sewing. "Can I help you, sir?" "Xavier Landon," he said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "I've taken the vacant deputy position under Sheriff Miller." Rosalind hesitated before accepting his handshake. His grip was firm but gentle, his hand calloused from what she assumed was years of hard work. "Rosalind Vance." "Welcome to Angel's Camp, Deputy Landon. Call me Xav," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. "Everyone does. What brings you to a dressmaker's shop at this hour?" "Xav." Rosalind couldn't help but return his smile. He reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle of fabric. "Seems I tore my only good shirt while helping break up a fight at the saloon tonight. Sheriff says you're the best with a needle in 3 counties. Rosalind took the shirt, examining the tear along one seam. "This is an easy fix. I can have it ready by morning." "I'd be much obliged." He didn't move to leave, instead looking around the shop with interest. "You do all this yourself?" "I do," she replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "It was my mother's shop before she passed." "You have a gift," he said, gesturing to a half-finished wedding dress displayed on a mannequin in the corner. "That's beautiful work." Rosalind felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you." There was a moment of silence, not uncomfortable but charged with something Rosalind couldn't quite name. "I should let you get back to your work," Xav finally said, placing a coin on the counter. "What do I owe you for the repair?" "That's far too much for a simple seam," Rosalind protested. Trying to hand back the silver dollar, Xav closed her fingers around the coin. "Consider the rest payment for keeping the shop open after hours." His fingers lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary, and that strange flutter returned to Rosalind's chest. She watched him leave, disappearing into the rainy night before turning back to her work with renewed energy. The next morning, Rosalind awoke earlier than usual. She finished the repair on Xav's shirt before her regular customers began arriving, wrapping it carefully in brown paper. She told herself she would send it to the sheriff's office with the delivery boy, but by midday, she found herself walking there personally. The sheriff's office was quiet when she entered. Sheriff Miller, a balding man with a perpetually worried expression, nodded in greeting. "Miss Vance, what brings you by?" "I have Deputy Landon's repaired shirt," she said, suddenly feeling foolish for coming in person. "He's out on patrol," the sheriff said, taking the package from her, "but I'll make sure he gets it." Rosalind was about to leave when the door opened and Xav walked in, looking even more imposing in daylight. His eyes brightened when he saw her. "Miss Vance," he said, removing his hat. "I was just about to stop by your shop." "I saved you the trouble," she replied, nodding toward the package in Sheriff Miller's hands. The sheriff looked between them with raised eyebrows before handing the package to Xav. "I've got paperwork to attend to," he muttered, disappearing into the back room. "Thank you for the quick repair," Xav said once they were alone. Would you allow me to repay your kindness by escorting you to dinner this evening? Rosalind stared at him, certain she had misheard. Dinner. Yes, dinner. The meal people typically eat in the evening, he teased gently. I'm new in town and could use some company, and I'd like to get to know the woman behind the remarkable stitchwork. Rosalind hesitated. No man had ever asked to court her properly before. There had been the occasional drunk from the saloon who thought her size made her an easy target for lewd propositions, but never a genuine dinner invitation. People will talk, she warned, watching his face carefully for any sign of jest or mockery. Xavier's expression remained earnest. Let them. I've never much cared for other people's opinions. Against her better judgment, Rosalind found herself agreeing. 7 o'clock, then. I live above my shop. I'll be there, Xavier promised, and something in his steady gaze made her believe him. That evening, Rosalind spent more time on her appearance than she had in years. She wore her newest dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair and brought out the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. She pinned her hair up in a style she'd seen in a fashion plate from San Francisco, allowing a few curls to frame her face. Precisely at 7, there was a knock at her door. Xavier stood on her threshold, clean-shaven and dressed in what must have been his best clothes. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers. You look beautiful, Miss Vance, he said, offering her the flowers. Rosalind, please, she replied, taking the bouquet with trembling fingers. Thank you. These are lovely. They walked to the hotel restaurant, the nicest establishment in Angel's Camp. Rosalind was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Deputy Landon, the handsome new lawman, escorting Rosalind Vance, the oversized spinster. It was fodder for weeks of gossip. To her surprise, Xavier seemed completely unbothered by the attention. He held doors open for her, pulled out her chair with perfect gentlemanly manners, and throughout dinner, kept her laughing with stories of his travels before settling in Angel's Camp. What brought you here? She asked as they enjoyed slices of apple pie. Most people are leaving small mining towns these days, not arriving. Xavier's expression grew more serious. I spent the last few years ranging all over Colorado, Montana, even up into the Dakota Territory. I was a bounty hunter for a while, then did some scouting for the Army. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. I wanted something different, something peaceful. And you chose law enforcement. Rosalind couldn't help but smile at the irony. He chuckled. Sheriff Miller assured me Angel's Camp is mostly quiet these days. The occasional drunk cowboy or dispute over a card game is about as exciting as it gets. Their conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in years, Rosalind forgot to be self-conscious about her size or what others might be thinking. Xavier had a way of making her feel as though she were the only person in the room, his attention never wavering. As they walked back to her shop under a canopy of stars, Xavier offered his arm. Rosalind took it hesitantly, marveling at how natural it felt to walk beside him. I had a wonderful time, she said when they reached her door. As did I. He hesitated, then asked, Would you allow me to call on you again? Rosalind searched his face in the lamplight. Why me? She finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind all evening. You must know what they say about me in town. I don't much care for gossip, Xavier replied. I prefer to form my own opinions. And in my opinion, Rosalind Vance, you're the most interesting person I've met in a very long time. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and gently kissed her cheek. Good night, he said softly, before turning and walking away, leaving Rosalind standing breathless at her door. The next morning, it seemed all of Angel's Camp was buzzing with news of their dinner. When Martha Pearson entered the shop, Her face was pinched with what appeared to be indignation. "I hear you dined with the new deputy last night," she said without preamble. "Good morning to you too, Mrs. Pearson," Rosalind replied calmly, continuing to measure fabric for a customer's order. "You should know, he's been asking questions about you around town," Martha continued. "My husband says he came into the bank inquiring about your business, and Sarah at the general store said he asked her if you were spoken for." Rosalind's hand stilled. "Did he now? I can't imagine what his interest is," Martha added with a sniff. "Though men sometimes have unusual appetites." The implication was clear, and it stung worse than any direct insult. Martha was suggesting that Xavier's interest in her was some sort of perversion, not genuine attraction. "Was there something you needed today, Mrs. Pearson?" Rosalind asked, her voice tight. "Or did you just come to deliver the latest gossip?" Martha looked affronted. "I merely thought you should know how people are talking. For your own good, of course." "Of course," Rosalind echoed, knowing full well that Martha's concern was anything but genuine. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have orders to complete." After Martha left, Rosalind tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept returning to their conversation. Was Xav truly interested in her, or was Martha right? Was his attention merely some sort of novelty that would wear off once the newness faded? Her doubts were still swirling when the shop door opened again just before closing time. Xav stood there, holding a small package. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. Rosalind shook her head. "Not at all. I was just about to close up. I brought you something." He placed the package on her counter. "Open it." Inside was a beautiful silver thimble, intricately engraved with tiny flowers. "I noticed yours was quite worn," Xav explained. "I saw this at the silversmith's and thought of you." Rosalind ran her finger over the delicate engravings. It was a thoughtful gift, practical yet personal. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." Xav smiled. "There's a traveling show setting up outside town for the weekend. Would you like to go tomorrow afternoon?" The doubt that Martha had planted began to wither under the warmth of Xav's genuine smile. "I'd like that very much." The traveling show was a modest affair by city standards, but for Angel's Camp, it was a significant event. There were performers doing acrobatics, a small menagerie of exotic animals, and booths selling everything from candy to cure-all tonics. Xav and Rosalind moved through the crowds, his hand occasionally resting on the small of her back to guide her. They stopped to watch a knife thrower demonstrate his skill, the blades embedding themselves in a wooden board mere inches from his assistant's body. Rosalind found herself instinctively shrinking back into Xav's solid presence behind her. "Nervous," he murmured near her ear. "A bit," she admitted. "I've never understood the appeal of such dangerous entertainment." "I suspect it's the thrill of seeing someone defy death," Xav replied, "though personally I've had enough close calls to last a lifetime." Rosalind turned to look at him. "What happened?" A shadow passed over Xav's face. "That's a story for another time," he said, guiding her toward a booth selling candied apples. "For now, let's enjoy the day." As they strolled through the fairgrounds, Rosalind became increasingly aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Some were merely curious, the new deputy was an object of interest in itself, but others were clearly malicious, particularly when directed at her. Near the fortune-teller's tent, they encountered a group of young men Rosalind recognized as local ranch hands. One of them, a brash fellow named Ethan Dolly, stepped directly into their path. "Afternoon, deputy," he said, his gaze sliding to Rosalind with a smirk. "Quite the catch you've got there. Bet she keeps you warm on cold nights." Xav's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "I'd advise you to mind your manners, Mr. Dolly. Just making conversation," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Rosalind. "Though I must say, Miss Vance, I never took you for the type to." "That's enough," Xav interrupted, his tone now carrying an edge of steel. "Apologize to the lady." Ethan's smirk widened. "No offense meant. Just surprised is all. Must be something special about you, Miss Vance, to catch the deputy's eye. Or maybe he just likes having something to grab onto." Before Rosalind could react, Xav had moved. In one fluid motion, he had Ethan by the collar, lifting him slightly off his feet despite the young man's considerable size. "Apologize," Xav repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." The other ranch hands backed away, suddenly finding great interest in the dirt beneath their boots. Ethan's face had gone pale, his bravado evaporating under Xav's grip. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance," he choked out. "It was just a joke." Xav released him with a slight push. "I suggest you find your humor elsewhere from now on, and spread the word Miss Vance is to be treated with respect in this town." Ethan nodded quickly before scurrying away with his friends. Rosalind stood frozen, a mixture of emotions churning inside her: embarrassment, gratitude, and a growing warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly as they walked away from the scene. Xav's jaw was still tight with anger. "Yes, I did. No one speaks to a lady that way, especially not one I." He paused, seeming to catch himself. "One I care about." The words hung between them, simple yet profound. Rosalind felt something shift in her chest, a fortress of self-protection beginning to crumble. "Thank you," she said, finding the courage to slip her hand into his. "For caring." Xav's fingers tightened around hers, and they continued through the fairgrounds, now oblivious to the stares around them. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Rosalind's life. Xav called on her regularly, bringing small gifts: a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, fresh wildflowers, and they spent every free moment together. He would sit in her shop during quiet afternoons, watching her work and talking about everything and nothing. Gradually, Rosalind learned more about his past. He had lost his parents young and been raised by an uncle who worked the cattle drives. He'd fought briefly in the war before heading west, and the things he'd seen had left their mark on him. "I've been running for a long time," he confessed one evening as they sat on the bench behind her shop watching the sunset. "From memories from myself, until I came here." "Why did you stop running?" Rosalind asked. Xav turned to her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "I think I found something worth staying for." The gossip in town hadn't ceased; if anything, it had intensified as their courtship continued. But something had changed. Xav's confrontation with Ethan Dolly had spread through Angel's camp like wildfire, and while people still whispered behind their hands, they did so with more caution now. Martha Pearson continued her thinly veiled barbs whenever she visited the shop, but even she seemed subdued, especially after Xav began escorting Rosalind to Sunday services, making their courtship unmistakably public and respectable. It was after one such service, as they walked back to Rosalind's shop for Sunday dinner, that Xav suddenly stopped in the middle of the street. "What's wrong?" Rosalind asked, alarmed by his serious expression. "Nothing's wrong," he said, taking both her hands in his. "In fact, for the first time in my life, everything feels right." A small crowd had gathered around them, Sunday churchgoers pausing to watch the scene unfolding. "Rosalind Vance," Xav continued, seemingly oblivious to their audience, "before I met you, I was just passing through life, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. You've given me a reason to stop running." To Rosalind's shock and the town's collective gasp, Xav dropped to one knee in the dusty street, still holding her hands. "I love you, Rosalind. Your strength, your kindness, your beautiful heart. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Time seemed to stand still. Rosalind was vaguely aware of the crowd around them, of Martha Pearson's open-mouthed shock, of Sheriff Miller's approving nod. But all she could truly see was Xav, his eyes full of sincerity and love for her, exactly as she was. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will." Xav rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her tenderly as the crowd erupted into cheers and congratulations. Even Martha Pearson managed a tight smile and a nod before hurrying away, no doubt to spread the news. The wedding preparations became the talk of Angel's Camp. Rosalind worked tirelessly on her own wedding dress, a creation more beautiful than any she had made before. Xav, meanwhile, set about improving the small house he had purchased on the edge of town, determined to make it a proper home for his bride. Not everyone was pleased with the match. There were still those who whispered that Xav must have ulterior motives, or that the marriage wouldn't last. But as the wedding day approached, even the most skeptical had to admit that the deputy's devotion appeared genuine. 3 days before the wedding, Rosalind was closing her shop when she heard a commotion from the saloon down the street. Gunshots rang out, followed by shouting. Her heart seized with fear. Xav often broke up fights at the saloon during his evening rounds. She rushed toward the noise, heedless of danger, only to be held back by Sheriff Miller. "Stay back, Miss Vance," he ordered, his face grim. "Is it Xav? Is he hurt?" she demanded, trying to see past him. Before the sheriff could answer, more men poured out of the saloon. 2 were dragging a third between them. Xav, his shirt darkened with blood on one side. Rosalind broke free from the sheriff's grasp and ran to him. "Xav, what happened?" "It's nothing," he grunted, though his face was pale with pain. "Just a scratch." "Knife fight," one of the men explained as they helped Xav toward the doctor's house. Deputy stepped in when Cord Taylor pulled a blade on Jim Foster over a card game. "Got sliced for his trouble." "Take him to my shop," Rosalind instructed, suddenly practical despite her fear. "It's closer than the doctor's house, and I have clean linens." They did as she ordered, laying Xav on the settee in her back room. Rosalind quickly cut away his bloodied shirt, revealing a long gash along his ribs. "It's not deep," she said with relief, though her hands trembled as she cleaned the wound. Xav caught her wrist. "I'm fine, Rosie," he said, using the endearment he'd taken to calling her in private. "It would take more than a drunk with a knife to keep me from our wedding." When the doctor arrived, he confirmed what Rosalind had already surmised: the wound was not life-threatening. He stitched Xav up and left instructions for care, recommending rest for at least 2 days. "You'll stay here," Rosalind decided once they were alone. "I can make up the spare room." Xav raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's proper with the wedding so close?" "Propriety be damned," she replied with uncharacteristic vehemence. "I almost lost you tonight. I'm not letting you out of my sight until you're well." He smiled weakly. "Yes, madam." Word of the incident and of Rosalind's nursing spread quickly through Angel's Camp. To her surprise, women who had previously avoided her shop began stopping by with offerings of food and well wishes for the deputy's recovery. Even Martha Pearson appeared with a jar of her famous preserve and grudging words of concern. "It seems the town has decided you're a hero," Rosalind remarked to Xav as she changed his bandages the day before their wedding. "Mrs. Pearson actually smiled at me today." Xav chuckled, then winced at the movement. "It's not me they've changed their minds about, it's you. They're finally seeing what I saw from the beginning, how remarkable you are." Rosalind blushed. "I'm not remarkable, I'm just beautiful," Xav finished for her. "Strong, kind. The woman I love more than life itself." "You're only saying that because I'm the one changing your bandages," she teased, though her heart swelled at his words. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "I'm saying it because it's true. And after tomorrow, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the union. The small church was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the event. Rosalind stood in the back, her wedding dress fitting perfectly, accentuating her curves rather than trying to hide them. For the first time in her life, she felt truly beautiful. When the music began and she walked down the aisle, she saw only Xav waiting for her at the altar, his eyes shining with love and pride. Despite his injury, he stood tall and straight in his new suit, looking every inch the handsome lawman who had walked into her shop months ago and changed her life forever. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership that moved many in the congregation to tears. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xav's kiss was tender yet passionate, a declaration to all present that this was a marriage of true love. The reception was held in the town square, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by nearly every household in Angel's Camp. Music played, people danced, and for once, Rosalind didn't hear a single whisper about her size or appearance. Instead, she received genuine congratulations and warm wishes for their future. As the evening wore on, she found herself approached by women who had previously avoided her company. They chatted easily now, as if she had suddenly become one of them. It was Martha Pearson, however, whose words surprised her most. "You've done well for yourself, Mrs. Landon," the older woman said, using Rosalind's new name for the first time. "And I must say your dress is exquisite, your finest work yet. Thank you, Mrs. Pearson," Rosalind replied, momentarily speechless at the genuine compliment. Martha hesitated, then added more quietly, "I may have misjudged you and him. You make a fine couple." Before Rosalind could respond to this unexpected olive branch, Martha had moved on, leaving her staring after her in amazement. Xav appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "What did Mrs. Pearson want?" "I think she just apologized in her own way," Rosalind said, still stunned. Xav grinned. "Miracles never cease, though anyone who can't see how lucky I am must be blind." As the celebration continued around them, Xav drew Rosalind aside to a quiet corner of the square. "Are you happy, Mrs. Landon?" he asked softly. Rosalind looked up at him, this man who had seen beyond her size to the woman beneath, who had silenced the gossips not with threats but with his unwavering love and respect. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. They left the reception amidst cheers and well wishes, making their way to their new home, where Xav insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite his healing wound. Inside, he had prepared a surprise. The back room had been converted into a new sewing space for her, with better light and storage than her shop had offered. "You can still keep the shop in town," he explained as she explored the room in wonder. "But I thought you might like a space at home as well for special projects." "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace him carefully, mindful of his injury. "Everything is perfect." In the months that followed, life in Angel's Camp settled into a new rhythm. Rosalind continued her dressmaking business, which flourished as her newfound status as the deputy's wife brought in customers who had previously taken their sewing elsewhere. Xav's reputation as a fair but firm lawman grew, and the town experienced a period of unusual peace under his and Sheriff Miller's watch. Most remarkably, the whispers about Rosalind's size gradually ceased. Whether out of respect for Xav, or because they had simply found other subjects to gossip about, The townspeople began treating her with genuine warmth and inclusion. She was invited to join the Ladies' Aid Society, even elected treasurer due to her head for numbers. Their home became known for its hospitality, with Rosalind often hosting dinners for Xavier's fellow lawmen and their wives. Even Martha Pearson became a regular visitor, their former animosity evolving into an unlikely friendship based on a shared interest in Eastern fashion trends and a mutual talent for organizing town events. A year after their wedding, Rosalind discovered she was with child. The news spread quickly through Angel's camp, bringing a fresh wave of excitement and congratulations. Xav was ecstatic, hovering over her with such concern that she finally had to banish him from the shop during business hours, lest he scare away customers with his constant inquiries about her comfort. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," he replied, placing a gentle hand on her slightly rounded stomach. "Not my wife." Rosalind covered his hand with hers. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted. "A husband who loves me, a child on the way, acceptance in this town." "You deserve all of it and more," Xav said, his voice husky with emotion. "You changed me, Rosie. Gave me a home when I thought I'd spend my life wandering." As her pregnancy progressed, Rosalind found herself the recipient of advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and more casseroles than they could possibly eat. The women who had once whispered behind their hands now clucked over her like mother hens, insisting she rest, while they took turns helping in the shop. 7 months into her pregnancy, a late winter storm blanketed Angel's camp in snow, trapping many residents in their homes for days. Xav had been called out to help a stranded family on the outskirts of town when Rosalind felt the first pains. "It's too early," she gasped to Martha Pearson, who had braved the snow to check on her. "The baby isn't due for another 2 months." Martha's usual composure slipped, revealing genuine concern. "I'll send for the doctor, and someone needs to find Xav." The next few hours were a blur of pain and fear. The doctor arrived, grim-faced as he examined her, while Martha and several other women prepared the bedroom and heated water. There was no sign of Xav. "The baby's coming," the doctor announced finally, "and it's breech. We can't wait." Rosalind gripped Martha's hand, terror mingling with determination. "Xav," she whispered. "I need Xav." "He'll be here," Martha promised, her usual sharpness replaced by genuine compassion. "He'd move heaven and earth to get to you." The labor was difficult, the pain almost unbearable as the doctor worked to turn the baby. Rosalind drifted in and out of awareness, clinging to consciousness through sheer force of will. She would not leave this child motherless. She would not leave Xav alone. Just when she thought she couldn't endure another moment, the door burst open. Xav stood there, covered in snow, his face wild with fear and determination. "Rosie," he breathed, rushing to her side and taking her hand from Martha's. "I'm here. I'm right here." With Xav beside her, his strength flowing into her, Rosalind found new resolve. When the doctor instructed her to push one final time, she gathered every ounce of her considerable will and bore down. A cry filled the room, tiny but strong. "A boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squalling infant. "Small, but he's a fighter." Tears streamed down Xav's face as he looked at their son. "Just like his mother," he said, pressing a kiss to Rosalind's damp forehead. "They named him William, after Xav's father." Despite his early arrival, he proved to be as strong-willed as both his parents, growing steadily under their devoted care. Rosalind recovered slowly but completely, and by spring, she was back in her shop part-time, with William napping in a basket beside her sewing table. The birth of their son seemed to cement their place in Angel's Camp's community. What few whispers remained about their unusual match were silenced completely by the evident happiness of their family. Xavier's pride in his wife and son was obvious to all, as was Rosalind's confidence in her role as both businesswoman and mother. 3 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, born with her mother's auburn hair and her father's striking blue eyes. Their family was complete, their happiness full. One evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching 5-year-old William chase fireflies while Elizabeth slept in Xavier's arms, Rosalind reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Coming to Angel's Camp, marrying me?" Xavier looked at her in surprise. "What brought this on?" Rosalind shrugged. "I overheard Mrs. Foster telling the new schoolteacher about us today, about how you tamed the town spinster and made an honest woman of me." Xavier's jaw tightened. "That's not how it happened." "No," Rosalind agreed with a small smile. "It isn't. But it made me wonder, do you ever think about the life you might have had if you'd kept wandering?" Xavier shifted Elizabeth to his other arm and reached for Rosalind's hand. "I don't have to wonder. I know exactly what that life would have been: empty, lonely, without purpose." He squeezed her fingers. "You didn't just give me a family, Rosie. You gave me peace, a home, everything I never knew I was searching for." Rosalind leaned against his shoulder, watching their son dance through the twilight. "The talk has never really stopped, you know. They just say different things now." "Let them talk," Xavier replied simply. "Words can't touch what we have," and he was right. In the years that followed, Angel's Camp continued to change and grow. New minds opened, bringing fresh faces and opportunities. Rosalind's dressmaking business expanded to include a small millinery section, becoming one of the most successful establishments in town. Xavier eventually became sheriff when Miller retired, his fair-minded approach to law enforcement earning him respect throughout the county. William grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's sense of justice and his mother's eye for detail, eventually apprenticing with the town's lawyer. Elizabeth, spirited and clever, showed a talent for numbers that suggested she might one day take over her mother's business. Through it all, the love between Xavier and Rosalind only deepened. The passion that had surprised them both in the beginning mellowed into a profound partnership built on respect, trust, and unwavering devotion. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the town organized a surprise celebration in their honor. Nearly every resident of Angel's Camp gathered in the town square, which had been decorated with lanterns and flowers for the occasion. Martha Pearson, now a widow but still a formidable presence in town affairs, raised a glass in toast. "To Sheriff and Mrs. Landon," she announced, her voice carrying across the crowd. 20 years ago, many of us, myself included, doubted this match." She paused, her gaze finding Rosalind's. "We couldn't have been more wrong. You've shown us all what true love looks like. May you have 20 more years of happiness, and 20 more after that." As cheers erupted around them, Xavier turned to Rosalind with the same look of wonder he'd worn on their wedding day. "Did you ever imagine, that first day I walked into your shop, that we'd end up here?" Rosalind shook her head. "Never. I was too busy trying not to stare at the handsome stranger asking for directions." Xavier laughed, pulling her close. "And I was too busy trying not to trip over my own feet, because the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen was looking at me with those remarkable brown eyes." "Charmer," she accused fondly. "Honest man," he corrected, kissing her softly as their friends and neighbors applauded around them. Later that night, as they walked home arm in arm under the stars, Rosalind thought about the journey they had taken together. From a lonely dressmaker and a wandering lawman to the heart of Angels Camp's community, parents to two wonderful children, partners in every sense of the word. The cruel whispers that had once followed her through town had long since faded into memory. In their place was respect, friendship, and a life fuller than she had ever dared to dream possible. All because one man had seen beyond what others could not or would not see. "Penny for your thoughts," Xav murmured as they approached their home, the house they had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family and Rosalind's thriving business. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am," she replied. "How one moment can change everything." "Which moment?" he asked, opening their gate for her. Rosalind smiled up at him, the lines around her eyes speaking of years of laughter and joy. "When you walked through my shop door looking for directions, when you asked me to dinner despite what everyone said, when you loved me exactly as I am." Xav drew her into his arms, his embrace as strong and sure as it had been 20 years before. "Best decisions I ever made," he whispered against her hair, "and I'd make them all again in a heartbeat." Inside their home, a lamp burned in the window, welcoming them back. Beyond it lay the life they had built together, a testament to love's power to transform not just two lives but an entire community. The fat woman who had once been the talk of the town and the wandering cowboy who had made her his wife had become a legend in Angels Camp, not for the scandal their union had initially caused, but for the enduring love that had silenced every voice of doubt and proven that true beauty, like true love, comes in all shapes and sizes. And as they crossed their threshold together, hand in hand as they had done countless times before, they carried with them the knowledge that some stories don't end with happily ever after. Some stories, the best ones, continue to unfold day by day, year by year, each chapter more beautiful than the last.